Hello everyone and welcome to Daily News Simplified, your one-stop solution to detailed analysis of current affairs which are published in the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. Articles dated 28th of November 2022 are listed on your screen, and the timestamping along with the notes in PDF and Word format are given in the description box. So let us begin with the first article for the day. This article of the Hindu newspaper appeared on page first and talks about an important element of India's international relation, where India has invited the Egyptian President Al-Sisi to be the chief guest for its incoming Republic Day celebration that is going to be celebrated on 26th of January. The Egyptian President Abdel Fattah is going to be the chief guest for India's Republic Day celebration this year. And this is going to be the first after the end of COVID crisis and will come as a welcome step from the Indian side on its all-weather friend Egypt. Now, as far as India's international relations are concerned, so they are relevant for your GS paper 2. In the previous years, as you can see on the screen, on multiple instances, UPSC has framed questions on India's bilateral relations. For example, in 2018, they have asked with respect to India's relation to Israel. In 2019, they have asked with respect to India-Japan relation, and in 2020, they asked with respect to India-US defense deals with comparison to India-Russia defense deals. So when we try to analyze how UPSC is framing international relation questions in the GS paper 2, we will find that most of the time UPSC is targeting the cultural, defense, economic or political relations that India shares with other countries. So based on the same, today we are going to analyze India-Egypt relationship in these 4 important headings, and we are going to look into why these 2 countries are important for each other at bilateral, multilateral and international global platform. As we have seen, India and Egypt are now celebrating 75 years of their diplomatic relation. This is far better, far cordial than what India has been sharing with its neighboring countries. Now the first question is why India needs Egypt. The first foremost reason is that both of them are sharing the non-aligned movement philosophy, where they decided in the decade of 1950s that they are not going to stand up with any of the pole that became the forefront in the international diplomacy with respect to the power projection. In the first decade after the World War II, there were 2 important geopolitical powers. The first one, the USSR, and the second was US. Both were fighting the Cold War to live up to their hegemony. India, with Egypt and many other countries including Indonesia, has decided to not to join either of the grouping, and they decided to remain non-aligned. Until now, both these countries have been following the same strategy and they have not joined any specific defense grouping like NATO. The second reason is that India's Europe-bound trade passes through the Suez Canal. Now, since the nationalization of Suez Canal after the Second World War, Suez Canal became the most important route for India to reach out to the European markets. And not only that, even the European markets made India to be the most important destination for their high-end exports. And for that matter, India's Europe-bound trade passes through the Suez Canal, which is under the jurisdiction of Egypt. Egypt is the only country that shares a border with Asia, and because of that, Egypt has remained a door for India's reach out to African continent. Now, India is a country which is looking for larger markets for its export, and Africa is the destination which has been going through the higher income rise as far as middle class is concerned. So based on the same, India's outreach for trade relation to Africa can have a catalyst of Egypt. As India is looking into the expansion and the outreach in the Indo-Pacific region, Egypt remains the one of the most important element over there. Through the access of Red Sea, Egypt can provide India the larger access to the western front of Indian Ocean, especially with respect to the maritime security. Now, Egypt is a place which can provide direct access and fight against the sea piracy that is observed in the western front of Indian Ocean. If we look into the Look West policy of India, Egypt frames the most important element in this policy. Egypt not only remains one of the close friends of the Arab world, but also the leader where India can project itself in the good shape. So India's Look West policy cannot be determined without the presence of Egypt. And the last one is the UNSC reform. India is a growing economy as well as a growing geopolitical power. India is looking for a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council, on which the vote of Egypt in the United Nations General Assembly is very, very vital. Now, keeping these points aside, let us look into why Egypt is important for India. India is a rising economic defense power. India is the third largest GDP in terms of purchasing power parity and the highest spending defense power in the world. Egypt would like to have a more cordial relation with India in order to gain the large markets for its exports, especially in terms of the cotton export, because Egypt is known to export one of the finest and the longest cotton fiber in the world. India is housing one of the largest Muslim population in the world, and as Egypt also has a large Muslim population, the religious context becomes obvious. Both the countries are sharing the non-aligned philosophy and they do not stand with a defense partnership of any grouping. And the last one being that after the Arab Spring, Egypt has shifted towards more open democratic framework, and they have been supporting the democratic philosophies and the principles across the world, and India, being the largest democracy, shares the same value system. As far as area of cooperation is concerned, so recently what we have seen, and that was also mentioned in the article, that Renew Power, an important entity in India, has been deciding to spend around $8 billion to build a clean hydrogen facility in Suez Canal economic zone. And this hydrogen facility will later on be exported to India also. Apart from the green energy, IT sectors, that is Indian IT firms, cybersecurity, small scale and medium scale enterprises, cultural exchanges, solar energy, agriculture and nanotech remains the larger aspect of area of cooperation between these two nations. Now, for the students who are preparing for the UPSC, it is important to understand that all factors and area of cooperation is not shared by each and every country. For that matter, you should be well aware that which of the important strategic sectors are not being shared between India and its member nations. For example, here you can easily deduce that nuclear energy is absent. Here you can easily say that there is almost minimal defense trade. So that point should be kept in mind while writing an answer. Now, coming towards the important dimensions of India-Egypt relationship. The first one we are going to discuss is the economic dimension. India and Egypt have framed a joint trade committee, and now this is a very high level committee which shares the ideas and the pointers to expand the international trade. India and Arab countries have already signed and joined the Energy Forum, which was organized for the first time in 2021, where they have discussed a new framework to bring more energy partnership in the future. As of now, the bilateral trade between both these countries stand at about $4.15 billion, and to your notice, India is sharing a positive or favorable balance of trade where the exports of India to Egypt is far more than India's import from Egypt. The main traded goods between both these countries remains more or less the agriculture and the IT sector, and in agriculture, India is one of the largest exporter of wheat to Egypt, especially after the Ukraine-Russia crisis, and Egypt has been the largest long fiber exporter of cotton to India. And in last, Indian IT firms such as Tata Consultancy Services have been there with the larger presence in cities like Cairo in Egypt. On the political front, both the countries signed the Friendship Treaty under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru and Abdul Nasir. They have been meeting on the high-level front on the pretext of non-aligned movement. It is a sorry state to say that both the countries and their leaders have not been meeting as far as bilateral status is concerned, and they have been finding the multilateral platform for these kind of meetings. As far as COVID situation is concerned, so Egypt was one country which has been very proactive and very generous to provide remdesivir kind of medicines to India to fight the disease. Egypt has recently signed and ratified the International Solar Alliance, being one of the countries which lies between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn to utilize the solar energy, the initiative that was highlighted and initiated by India and France. India has been providing the grant in aid, and this grant in aid will be including the Pan-Africa telemedicine and the tele-education, and both the front have been utilized by Egypt to a larger extent. As far as defense partnership is concerned, so it includes the India's participation in the Egyptian Defense Expo, a joint defense committee, which is a very high level of initiative to take the defense talk to the next level. And because of this, recently, Cairo have been participating with India on different defense exercises, which includes the Milan, which is a naval exercise, and a Desert Warrior, which is an Air Force based exercise. Cairo, unlike many other Arab nations, I will repeat, unlike many other Arab nations, have been supporting the talks with respect to the Kashmir issue, and it stands with the peaceful resolution to the Kashmir issue between India and Pakistan. And lastly, we come to the cultural aspect. Both the countries share the world's oldest civilization, the Egyptian civilization and the Indus Valley civilization. Both the countries have a large Islamic population, and that could act as a catalyst for the cultural exchanges. Mahatma Gandhi from Indian front and Saad Zaghloul have been sharing the common view on India's independence through peaceful means. Jawaharlal Nehru and Abdul Nasir had friend relationship, because of which we have the non-aligned movement which came into practice. And lastly, India in the last 7-8 years have been utilizing the yoga diplomacy for the cultural exchanges with the people of Egypt. Now coming to the basic challenges that should always be there while writing the answer. The first challenge is that Egypt and many other Arab nations are anti-Israel. So both these groups had a bitter history of fighting against each other for the small piece of land. And as India had a very good and cordial relations with Israel, India's inroads deeper into the diplomacy of Egypt has remained a challenge. The second one is non-aligned movement as a group itself is losing its shine in the international platform. The reason being simple: the Cold War has ended and USSR has lost its power projection. And since the 1990s, there is a unipolar world dominated by the hegemony of United States. Until the rise of China to go against US, there is going to be a unilateral world. And as there is a unipolar world, non-aligned movement has lost its shine to be the non-sided group. Egypt has housed limited number of Indian diaspora. So unlike Saudi Arabia or the UAE, Egypt does not houses millions of Indians. There are no such workers who are working in these countries which can be a game changer for India. There are around 3,200 Indians who are as of now in 2022 residing in Egypt. And the last one is there is low bilateral trade. As the economic trade between both these countries is not very vibrant, diplomatic and the political exchanges have remained very, very limited. Now, what should be the ideal way forward? As first is, as there are numerous aspects and avenues for the cultural exchanges, including the religion and the yoga diplomacy, that should be intensified. Government of India should look more into the intensification of Look West policy and gradually transfer it to the more strategic Act West policy. India should look into more focus towards the expansion of bilateral trade with special reference to the agricultural goods and the IT sector. And lastly, Government of India could look into the expansion of Indo-Pacific approach to Indo-Abrahamic. Now, this is a keyword that should be kept noted. Now, what is Indo-Abrahamic? Indo-Abrahamic is a new and emerging trans-regional order in which India would like to connect intensively with West Asian nations and the Eastern Mediterranean nation. If India wants to go for the expansion of Act East-West policy. Indo-Abrahamic should be the main catalytic factor in this area. With this discussion in place, let us now move to the next article for the day. This article of the Hindu newspaper appeared as a part of text and context section and talks about the debate of whether there should be the legalization of same-sex marriage in India or not. Recently, the Supreme Court bench led by the Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, has issued notices to the central government as well as the Attorney General of India to seek response on the petitions which were filed by a few gay couples to solemnize the same-sex marriage in India under the Special Marriage Act 1954. Now, from the perspective of this examination, basic provisions of Special Marriage Act is important. However, the more important thing is the debate whether this should be allowed or not. And we will look into the pros and cons of allowing the same-sex marriage in India along with the international best practices. Now, from the perspective of Special Marriage Act 1954, this act deals with the registration and the divorce of couples from different religious background. Now, the basic principle of this act was to bring out the registration of those couples who are getting married into the different religious background in India. So, as these marriages could not find place under the Hindu Marriage Act or any other provision, a separate marriage act was created. Under this, a marriage will be called as solemnized if any two persons follow the following conditions to get registered under the act. The first one is that neither of them should have been married to other person. They should be of sound mind and healthy mental fitness. They should not be party to any insanity. They should not have any prohibited relationship previously, and they should have completed the age of 21 for male and 18 for female. Now, in these 5 pointers, the second last, that is this one, where they should not be within the degree of any prohibited relationship. Now, this prohibited relationship was falling under the section 377 previously. However, it has been decriminalized by the Supreme Court order. So, this time, petitioners are demanding that this kind of prohibited relationship should be avoided and same-sex people should be allowed to get married in India. Now, the real issue is that as of now, there is no law that recognizes the same-sex marriage. But at the same time, there is no law that restricts. So, neither there is any permission nor there is any restrictions on the same-sex marriage. Now, the people who are getting into this relationship can get marriage, but that will not be recognized under any law in India. Now, when it comes to the basic argument with respect to the same-sex marriage, these are the following judgments which previously had supported the viewpoint. The first judgment came from the Supreme Court under Nalsa versus Union of India in 2014, where UPSC has recognized transgender to be the third gender, and the same column has been utilized by the government under various petitions forms for its services. After this order, Parliament has enacted the Transgender Person Protection of Rights Act 2019 for the protection of the transgender people in India. And after the publication of this right, transgenders have been allowed for various basic human rights which they were denied previously. In 2018, a landmark judgment from the Supreme Court came under the Navtesh Singh Johar case, in which Supreme Court clearly decriminalized the homosexuality under section 377 of IPC. And based on that same judgment, the LGBTIQ community have now been enjoying the equal rights available to the other people. In a year previously, in 2017, under the K.S. Puttaswamy judgment, right to privacy was upheld by Supreme Court as a part of Article 21 for basic life and personal liberty. And not only that, the adultery under the Indian Penal Code has also been made gender neutral. So all these provisions under the Supreme Court and the initiative taken by the Supreme Court shows the maturity of Indian society. And that is something that has been taken as a clue by the petitioner so that these people can be provided equal rights to live a dignified married life. Apart from the Supreme Court judgments, even the Article 14 and 15 of the Indian Constitution clearly states that equality should be upheld even in the case of same-sex couple. As you can see, under Article 15 of the Indian Constitution, Article 15 clearly proves that ground of discrimination should not be on the basis of sex of a person. So as it calls about the gender of a person, discrimination should be avoided. There are certain provisions in the Special Marriage Act itself. For example, the Section 4C of this Act clearly states terms like male, female, or even the terms like husband and wife. So if the Parliament go for the amendment of this Act, they need to go into the gender neutral terminology to bring the LGBTIQ community into the perspective. Now, as far as government previous argument were concerned, so first of all, government has clearly argued that the marriage in India under the Special Marriage Act of 1954 can only take place between the biological men and biological women. Secondly, government has also stated that marriage between two individuals of same gender has neither been recognized nor accepted in any personal law of India. So from the government side, it is clearly stated that they neither recognize nor restrict such kind of practices. But if those people get into the marriage alliance, they will not be recognized under the Indian law. If we go by the international best practices, Netherlands was the first nation to allow the same-sex marriage. US has followed the same when the Supreme Court of United States in 2015 has struck down and stated that all states allow the same-sex marriage. If they don't, they violate the 14th Amendment, which is based on the equality. France has allowed in 2013 and Australia in 2017. Now, when we talk about the 14th Constitutional Amendment of United States, this amendment provides the equality and says that no state will deprive a person of life, liberty, property without a due process of law. If you go by the basic understanding of the GS paper 2, a question was asked with respect to the equality from the Indian Constitution in comparison to the US Constitution. In the same question, a person can easily utilize the 14th Amendment of the US as well as the Article 14 and Article 15 of the Indian Constitution to write a very logical and scoring answer. So what should government do ahead? So before moving ahead, some questions should be answered by the Supreme Court, government itself and the society itself. The first question is that whether there is the requirement of Special Marriage Act or not. Should government come up with the amendment in the SMA or should they bring a new law altogether? What about the decisions with respect to the inheritance of the property, divorce among such people, child adoption cases, and even the socioeconomic factors? What will happen to the custody of a child if same-sex parents get divorced? What will be the case of alimony in terms of divorce? How will the society react to such kind of provisions in the law? And will the states across India stand with the Supreme Court order or not? Because law and order in India comes under the state list. So the contribution and the cooperation at the state level will also be judged if government plans to move ahead on this law amendment. With this discussion place, let us now move to the next article for the day. This article of the Hindu newspaper appeared as a part of text and context section and talks about an important cybersecurity threat called as bluebugging. Now in bluebugging, there are two terms. First is blue and it is derived from the term Bluetooth. Bluetooth is a wireless technology to transfer data from one device to the other. Bugging, on the other hand, refers to the unexpected error which takes place or unexpected problem that takes place in a software or a hardware. So context in this manner would mean that unwanted or unexpected problem occurred in a digital device with respect to the Bluetooth. Now, context says that according to some of the researchers, there is a bluebugging which is taking place as a cyber security threat. According to this, if a person connect their smartphones or the laptop to the wireless earplugs, a person or a hacker can record the conversation, and even the iPhones which are secure, which are considered to be the more secure, are also vulnerable under this threat. As per the basic definition, bluebugging is a form of hacking. Hacking means to stealing data, which allow the attackers to access the device through its discoverable Bluetooth connection. So whenever there is an open Bluetooth connection which allow the random people to connect to a particular device, bluebugging can take place. If bluebugging is there, a person or a hacker can control the device remotely. They can also send or read the text messages, and the important one being the OTPs received by the user. They may also monitor the phone calls and record it. But there is a condition. The bluebugging can happen when there is a Bluetooth device and also has an open setting within the reach of 10 meters to the hacker. If a person is under the bluebugging, how that person can recognize the threat? If the phone calls are getting suddenly disconnected and getting reconnected, if they are seeing some messages to be sent but not by them, if the device has been reset to the factory setting, or there is an installation of a particular app but they cannot recall. And lastly, if there is a sudden rise in the data usage of a mobile device, there is the perception of under attack of bluebugging malware. Now, what are the solutions to this problem? The first one is that a person should turn off the Bluetooth devices if they are not in use. They should regularly update the device system software so that such bugs can be removed. They should not utilize to a larger extent the public Wi-Fi, which remains mostly open. They should try to use the VPN for the additional security and try to install the modern antivirus softwares to fight such kind of hacking system. With this discussion, please, let us now move to the next article for the day. This article of the Hindu newspaper appeared on page 4 and talks about the annual Ganga Mela, which is organized annually in the city of Dehradun. This annual festival is celebrated at Ganga War Memorial, which is situated in the city of Dehradun in Uttarakhand. The celebration of this festival is with respect to the remembrance of the sacrifice which was made by the Gorkha warriors who bravely fought against the British in the Battle of Nalapani in 1814. When the Gorkhas were fighting with the British East India Company and its imperialism, that particular place was under the domination of Nepali kingdom. This festival annually celebrated with the performance of Kukri dance, which is also performed by the personals of Assam Rifle. Kukri dance is the dance which is being performed with a prop, and this prop is actually a kukri knife, which is a symbol for bravery among the Gorkhas. As far as Battle of Nalapani is concerned, so it was fought in 1814 between the East India Company forces led by Robert Gillespie and the Gorkha forces led by Balbhadra Singh Thapa. This battle was fought by the East India Company in order to capture the Fort Ganga or the Fort of Nalapani, because Britishers wanted to capture the lower Himalayan region of Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand back then in the 19th century to get more control over these areas. Now, the battle is recognized because Gorkhas, including the children, were able to defend the fort of Nalapani against the East India Company forces, which ranged between 5 to 6,000 without food and water for almost 6 weeks. Although the victory was not decisive for East India Company and it was criticized by the higher authorities in the company itself, company actually recognized the bravery made by the Gorkhas, and by the impression of their bravery and the loyalty, Gorkhas were given one of the highest positions as a separate regiment in the defense forces of British East India Company. And till now, the Gorkha regiment is known for its brave achievements in the defense of India. As you can see in this map itself, This particular shaded region, which is existing area of Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, was earlier under the Greater Nepal of 19th century. Right now, this area is part of India because it was occupied by East India Company and later on ruled by the Crown itself. With this discussion place, now we come to the last article for the day. This article of the Hindu newspaper appeared on page 5th and talks about an important initiative taken by the state of Bihar. And this initiative is known as Ghar Ganga Jal scheme. Now, such kind of state level initiative is important in the UPSC examination for the pretext of writing examples in the mains examination. Now, quoting such examples or welfare schemes in the mains examination can fetch you comparatively more marks. So, this scheme is launched by the government of Bihar. Under this scheme, piped Ganga water will be supplied to each household in Bihar itself. This scheme is a sub-component of Jal Jeevan Mission or Haryali scheme of the state. The objective of the scheme is straightforward. The first one is that it will utilize the excess flood water of Ganga. Now, Bihar lies in the lower plains of river Ganga. And not only Ganga, many other rivers including the Kosi river go with the annual floods. And this excess water actually damages the fields, the agricultural fields on both the sides. Now, what government of Bihar is thinking that whenever flood will occur in the state, they will capture that excess water, store it, refine it, filter it for the utilization for drinking purposes and other household activities. Now, when they do this, what they are doing, they actually try to conserve the groundwater. Because when Ganga Jal will be provided to the household, they will reduce down the groundwater utilization for the household purposes. Ultimately, it will help in the conservation of the groundwater in the state, and that conserved water can better be utilized for the irrigation purposes and the expansion of agricultural activities throughout the state. So, if implemented, this scheme is going to be a win-win situation for the government, rural and urban centers, as well as for the agriculture activities. With this discussion in place, now we come to the end of today's Daily News Simplified. Stay tuned for more such updates.